views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. Well, today we have a special 1-hour program inspired by our series of interviews with candidates for the office of Mayor of New York City. During this special, we air the specific questions you, the viewer, asked me to convey to all those who chose to appear, both Democrat and Republican. To see the full interviews for each candidate, you can watch our Mayoral Series at bronxnet.org. And as you can see, we have an important show, so don't go anywhere. Today's verdict starts right now. To start off the show, we asked candidates how would they help New Yorkers who are presently hurting financially, and what would they do for the city economically to bring back those who have left New York. This is what they said.
I have put out, David, what I call the largest, most inclusive economic comeback in the history of this city. 500,000 jobs. It's called Go Big, Go Small, Go Forward. And the essence of that is the Go Small, which protects a lot of the small businesses. And as you know, the small and family-owned businesses are responsible for half of the New Yorkers in New York City. And so we have to go and give a lifeline, protect those small businesses, and incentivize the formation of new small businesses. My plan does just that. And the Go Forward part is to make sure that those people who have been excluded get included in ways that they haven't historically. And I'm going to be committed to that because I know that's the future of this city. And that's the only way that this city comes back.
Just to take you back to a year ago, right before COVID hit, the unemployment rate in the city was 3.4%. We had added 970,000 jobs over 10 years. And I mean, we were strong economically. And once this virus came, the unemployment rate went from 3.4% to 20%. And those 970,000 jobs, we lost them in 30 days. And so this really was depression-like conditions. We had to literally shut down the entire economy. And a lot of people lost those jobs, had trouble feeding their families. And we know the tragedy that occurred with the tremendous loss of life. So we have to build back this city carefully through the lens of science. And we have real challenges ahead of us. And that's what this mayoral campaign is going to be about. Who's ready on day one to walk into City Hall, bring the economy back financially, deal with issues of health disparities, and we continue to have a larger discussion about the social justice issues facing New York.
Well, first of all, what I would say to them is, I know the Bronx. As you said, I grew up in Manhattan, but my very first job when I got out of school was in the Bronx. I was profoundly impacted as a kid by watching the South Bronx and so many other neighborhoods crumble, in some cases literally burn to the ground. And that lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of the city that I love. So I came back from school. I started working at a nonprofit on Albany Crescent, our office was, and I was helping rebuild those very same neighborhoods. And so what I would say is, if you want a mayor in City Hall who really knows how to rebuild brick by brick, street by street, this is a time for a mayor who really understands crisis. And, you know, David, I understand that crisis. I would also say I understand something about other crises as well. I was housing commissioner in the city in the wake of 9/11. President Obama asked me to be housing secretary in the midst of the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. When Sandy hit, I led the entire federal recovery. And when President Obama asked me to lead the $4 trillion federal budget after that, 3 weeks later, Ebola hit. And I was side by side in the Situation Room with Dr. Fauci and all of our leaders. So what I would say to your viewers is, you want a mayor who really knows something about leading through crisis? I'm the one they should think about.
Oh, I actually believe there's a lot that we need to do for the communities that are hurting the most, where we've seen the most economic downturn, and also particularly women heads of households. Women are stepping back from work in very large numbers because of the pressure of Zoom school, as well as many of their jobs just aren't there right now. So reopening the economy safely and quickly is the first imperative, but we have to be supporting our small businesses and particularly our restaurants, you know, with low cost financing, with grants, because If they don't survive, what will we have to return to? And they are the generators of employment.
We have to do so much, David. I've got a series of plans that I think are going to help get businesses and restaurants back on their feet, get individual families back on their feet. I've pledged $1 billion in economic relief to struggling New Yorkers a year during my term. And that sounds like a very big commitment, but we can do it. We have the resources. Just this week, I announced a People's Bank of New York that'll put $100 million into community development financial institutions and microloans that will get to families and entrepreneurs right there in the Bronx, businesses that are trying to get their doors open. We have to do much, much more for the people who are struggling. And one thing I'm very proud of is I think we're going to get some help from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the administration, in part because we now got them the Senate. Chuck Schumer is the majority leader. It's a whole new world in D.C. And I think Chuck Schumer is an incredible upgrade for New York over Mitch McConnell.
I believe it's a tough situation, but at the same time, I know it's doable. And I'm used to being in tough situations. I was a rookie cop during the mid 80s and early 90s when we were having 2,000 homicides a year. And I was part of a small team of police officers that created a system called OLTPS, where we started using data to identify crime patterns. And we went from being reactive to proactive to predictive, and it turned around how we looked at crime in the city. We no longer were experiencing 2,000 homicides a year, 98,000 robberies, and an equivalent amount of felonious assaults. And so I know what tough turnarounds look like and how to take something dysfunctional and make it functional. And that is what we're doing now. We're going to receive about $10 billion, $6 billion from the federal government, 3.5 is coming from the state through the Fed, from the Fed, but through the state, and almost $500 million is coming from what's called sports betting. Now the question becomes, do we use this influx of one-shot monies and dollars to take away the pre-existing inequalities that existed and put real systems in place, or do we do business as usual?
This is New York City. We recover from every crisis, every single one. Crisis in the 1970s, 9/11, Hurricane Sandy. This is a disaster. This is a crisis, but we pull together, we get it done. And what I have seen in communities all through this incredibly difficult period is everyone stepping up to help. The restaurant that was shuttered and couldn't earn a dime was feeding people who were hungry. People were showing up even in April at food pantries to volunteer because those food lines were snaking around blocks. People stepped up. And when we do that, when we recognize that our strongest and best selves are in crisis, we come back. And when I am mayor, we will do one other thing that we have never done in a crisis. We come back, we recover. But do we reimagine? Do we fix what was broken before the crisis? That's what we will do when Maya Wiley is mayor.
I'm not sure about the narrative about those who have left, quite honestly. You know, I think it was the New York Times last week, maybe Friday, that published something about the rising rates of home ownership in the city, and you know, the people that are buying homes. I think actually the people that we really lost were some of the more vulnerable folks who could no longer afford to be here. And so I think about really from an economic perspective, what do we do with the dollars that we do have access to, that we do have control of? We're still the richest city in the country. And you know, we have to make decisions about how we allocate the resources that we have differently so that we're prioritizing some of our most vulnerable. And I've also been a proponent and a supporter of the idea of taxing the rich. You know, we've seen that the last year we had more people become vulnerable and marginalized, while we also generated more millionaires and billionaires. I don't think we can decouple what we've seen in terms of from a safety perspective. We can't decouple that from the increasing insecurity that New Yorkers have experienced over the last 14 months, right? We're talking about increased housing insecurity, increased food insecurity. You know, we're talking about not providing universal access to healthcare in the middle of a pandemic, right? We've pushed people to the edge. And, it's no wonder that people are increasingly anxious and frustrated and feeling a sense of despair because we haven't prioritized actually taking care of people. So I think if we want to rebuild our city, we actually have to prioritize caring for people and making it possible for people to live in dignity. And I believe that there's a direct correlation between that and how safe we can be. I can't be safe if my neighbor's not safe.
Well, we have to take a quick break, but stay with us. Today's Verdict will be right back right after this.
This year, New York City began using ranked choice voting in primary and special elections for local offices, such as mayor, public advocate, comptroller, borough president, and city council. Ranked choice voting means that voters can rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference, instead of casting a vote for just one. You can still vote for just one candidate if you prefer. So, how will your ballot look? Your ballot will look the same as always, except now there will be a checkbox with ranking numbers depending on how many candidates there are in a race. So how does it work? If your first choice gets over 50% of votes, they automatically win the race. If none of the candidates get more than 50% of votes on the first round, then the candidate with the least amount of votes gets eliminated, and the votes get recounted again in a second round of counting. Here's an example. Let's rank colors. I like blue the most, so I'm marking it 1. I like purple second, green third, and orange fourth. Okay, my votes are in. Now other votes are counted and the results are as follows. Blue earned 36%, purple earned 27%, green earned 19%, and orange earned 18%. As you can see, none of these colors earned more than 50% of the votes. So the one with the smallest amount of votes gets eliminated. Voters who chose orange as their first choice now have their votes distributed to their second choice. This continues until a candidate receives 50% of the votes and becomes the official winner of the race. That's it. That's ranked choice voting. Ready? Let's vote.
We asked most candidates about homelessness throughout the 5 boroughs. We also asked how they would fix the issue. Here is their response to homelessness and quality of life.
This is a really important question. So first of all, it is about bringing the community together and having a conversation and a plan around housing for people who have a right to it and who need it. It's a humanitarian crisis. Homelessness is an eviction crisis. So one, we can prevent more homelessness, and we have a housing platform that we will be putting out shortly that will do that. But when we're talking about street homelessness, right? When we're talking about often like in the Lucerne, and I've met with the men of the Lucerne, I've been up there several times. One, the city got it wrong in the front end and didn't do what homeless experts would have said to do. So it could have been done right, and it wasn't. Fewer men in the shelter to begin with, and support services on site for the supports they needed. And so it was bumpy and rocky and scary for the residents. And we do have an obligation to ensure that residents have a voice. But if we had done that, if the city had done that, what we would have seen is a much smoother transition. And ultimately what happened is a model, which is the community came around and became part of the solution as well as the men in the Lucerne. They came together and figured it out. That is something we could do on the front end. But here's the other thing I would say. We can have a housing first strategy where instead of putting people in shelters, we're putting them directly in housing, supportive housing with the support services they need to stay in the housing, like mental health support services, like support services for rehabilitation. Been talking to experts. We're going to get that done. And it is going to include and involve conversations with the community because the community deserves to have a voice.
We have a homeless crisis, but we keep trying to view it from one dimension. Homelessness falls into three categories: children and families, single adults, and those with mental health illnesses. That is the population that you see on the streets every day, and we treat it incorrectly. What we do is that we wait until a person commits an act and we incarcerate them. That's why 48% of the people at Rikers Island have mental health illnesses. Or we give them treatment in a psychiatric facility and medicine for one day, and then we place them back on the streets. I say we need to partner with organizations like Fountain House. They have an 85% rate of allowing people to be self-sufficient and give them the wraparound services they need. That is an upstream way to deal with homelessness. We're not doing that now. Shelter is not the answer.
Street homelessness is something we can address, David. We can invest in safe haven beds, in supportive housing, in mental health resources and substance abuse resources, and frankly, more assertive interventions, trying to get someone off the streets into a better environment. This is something that all New Yorkers are for, because we know that this person who's on the street often needs help. And it also is unsettling just to see people on the street suffering in that way. It gives you a sense of uncertainty yourself. So I'm so excited to say that we can solve this problem. This is a solvable problem, and it's going to help everyone, from the people who are struggling to the business owners who are trying to restore like a thriving sidewalk.
Well, first, what I would say is you don't have to take my word for it. I've actually walked the walk on this, not just talk the talk. As I said, I led the strategy for President Obama. And what you need to do is not what Mayor de Blasio has done, which is to try to put a giant Band-Aid on the problem through shelter and hotels. You need to do what we did in the Obama administration, which is called housing first. By combining housing, permanent housing, with services that help to deal with the underlying issues of mental health and substance abuse, you not only dramatically improve the lives of the folks that are on our streets and in our shelters, you actually reduce the cost as well. That's what people don't understand. We're spending $3 billion a year on shelters and hotels, and we're actually could save lives and save money by Now, why would that be, you ask? Because where does somebody who's sleeping on our streets get their health care? In the emergency room. They cycle in and out of prisons or the mental health wings of our hospitals. Think about this. We spend over $400,000 per prisoner per year at Rikers. So we could pay for housing and the services and save money at the same time. But here's the other thing that you need to do, David. You need to, and this goes to your question about Mayor Bloomberg and President Obama's management style, relentlessly measure success. Stop doing what isn't working and keep doing what is. One of the reasons we made so much progress on homelessness is I started something called HUDStat. It was modeled on CompStat here from the city. And we relentlessly measured what was working, and we did more of it. And we measured what wasn't working, and we stopped doing those things. And that's critical too.
Look, over the time of de Blasio's mayoralty, homeless spending went from 1.6 billion to 3.2 billion, yet we have more homeless people than ever before. We have half the homeless population are children, and the conditions in these shelters are deplorable. And no human being should ever be forced into one of these shelters. So what we have to do is have a mayor who is going to build the housing that we need. 30% of the people who live in homeless shelters work, but there's no housing for them. And I have a proposal to use our vacant property, our vacant land, and build the kind of low-income housing we need. So we stop spending billions on shelters and start spending money on a real affordable housing plan. That's what Mayor LaGuardia did. That's what Ed Koch did. Every mayor has a housing plan. The problem with this mayor is this housing, the housing that he built was unaffordable. It was affordable housing, but it was actually unaffordable to the people who needed it the most.
Objective is for our best days to be in front of us, not behind us. And if we keep on this path with inept leadership or people who have given out press releases and have not done anything, we're going to continue in this trend. Homelessness, we need to prevent homelessness. We need to have the services for those who are formerly incarcerated. We need to have services for those who are suffering from mental illness. We need to have services for those who are suffering from drug abuse. We need to prevent the homelessness, and we can. It shouldn't be the case that we have so many New Yorkers who are without when we have so many limited number of New Yorkers who are with. And so my plan is to go prevent homelessness, to give them the necessary services, and to go from homelessness to an immediate stop at shelter as we get them into more permanent homes. And that's the objective. The objective is not to keep 50,000 or so people in a homeless condition or in a shelter. We got to move them out. And we need to be dedicated to this because we need to have a sense of urgency.
Well, we have to take a quick break, but stay with us. Today's Verdict will be right back right after this.
Struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic? There's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311.
Some candidates were asked about NYCHA. Many of my clients are in constant fear of injury as the locks are broken, ceilings are falling, and areas throughout their building are in disrepair. But we also asked about landlords and what we can do to help them survive without rents being paid. Here is the conversation.
I think we really need to demand a reinvestment in NYCHA. We've been divesting from NYCHA for decades. And that's what you're seeing, right? The result of that is that divestment. I've committed to, at least in the first year, investing at least $1.5 billion in addition to the current operating budget, and also seeking a match of that from the state level. I also think, there's something to be said for the federal relief package. But I think, the other thing ultimately that we need to do is we need to look towards democratizing NYCHA and giving residents the power to sort of control their own destiny much more so than we have right now. That includes, leading the board of NYCHA. And I've also called for the creation, at least in year one, of a pilot program that would identify one development in each borough and create a resident-owned, managed, and operated management company for those developments, right? So that they can begin to self-determine the status and the conditions of their lives. And we'd also be generating jobs for the residents.
Yes, no, the buildings are falling apart. It is a decision to allow them to basically be condemned by neglect. But there is an option. There is an option to do public-private partnerships that will immediately begin to renovate these buildings and these apartments. In the Bronx, several developments have completed: Baychester, Murphy, Betances. those tenants are like, wow, I didn't know I could have this in public housing. And they're proud of their apartments. Their elevators work. You wouldn't think that was a big deal, but that is a huge deal. And, we need to see more of that, not less.
Look, we're going to need to really manage the NYCHA developments and go building by building and make the repairs. And we're going to have to put a dollar amount next to, next to that price tag. And, part of my housing plan is to invest in NYCHA. Look, we're going to have to put money into these buildings before they collapse. And we have to make that investment. Now, I hope under the Biden administration, under the stimulus dollars, we will start to get the billions of dollars that they've owed us for a very long time. When LaGuardia built public housing in the 1930s, it was aspirational housing. When I was growing up in Washington Heights, there was no difference between Dykeman houses and where I lived a few blocks away. We were just a bunch of kids from the neighborhood. Today, if you go to Brooklyn, you see Ingersoll houses, you could see that complex just disintegrating because of the lack of repairs. But across the street is a bright, shiny luxury building. People are walking across the street to the shiny building and leaving the backbone of the city behind. This next mayor has got to manage for real change and lead a delegation, the business community and the labor community to Washington to get that NYCHA money, and also figure out new revenue streams to fix the boilers, the windows, and all the things that human beings should expect from their government.
I think we need to extend the eviction moratorium that's been going on through the pandemic. People should not be losing their homes during this time. Like if you lose your home during this time, it's catastrophic, both on an individual and family level, but on a community level and the city level. So we should be extending the moratorium. We should have free counsel for any tenant that wants to be represented, because that's been shown to keep people in their homes. We need to extend these tenant assistance programs. To me, the simplest solution truly is to keep someone in a stable situation and make sure that they don't wind up in an environment that is going to be very, excuse me.
Listen, the environment
they don't
itself
wind up in an environment that's going to be much more costly for both them and the city.
Well, it has to start, David, with a mayor who understands that NYCHA has to be at the center of our housing strategy. Think about this. More people live in public housing in New York City than in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a city unto itself, and it is the most precious housing resource we have. It's permanently affordable. And yet we've never had a mayor who really treated it that way. So what I would do, I would put it at the center of my housing plan. First time that's ever been done. I would dedicate $2 billion a year of city capital. And I know how, because of my work in Washington, my deep relationships with everyone in the Biden administration and on Capitol Hill, I actually know how to go get the $40 billion that we need to fix it. But here's the thing. You need money, but that's not all you need. You actually have to fix the management, right? Because here's what happens right now. Somebody's got a leak in their shower. By the time the 15 people who need to sign off on fixing it, all the way down to 250 Broadway, where the headquarters is, by the time they sign off, that leaky shower has become mold that is causing a child asthma. The ceiling downstairs has broken through, and it's a much more expensive repair. We're taking more than a year to fix what are called tickets in public housing. And that has to change as well. And the way that you change it is what's called site-based management. If you're a resident in NYCHA, you need to be able to walk down to the office downstairs, look somebody in the eye, and tell them what the problem is, knowing that they have the money, the authority, and the tools to be able to get it fixed. And that's not happening right now. So we need to completely reorganize the way NYCHA is managed as well.
Well, we have to take a quick break, but stay with us. Today's Verdict will be right back right after this. issue of crime in New York City is high. It was first and foremost on everyone's mind. How would you repair the relationship with our police while at the same time protecting individual liberties? Have a listen.
Well, David, that trust has been breached in large part because we have not held those serial abusers for whom we pay $200 million a year accountable. We need to have accountability. It's going to start with me. I have outlined the appointment of a deputy mayor for public safety so that we can have a more direct day-to-day involvement in the management of the policing across our communities. You talked about the emergency social services. We want to instill that. I want to make sure that we have a chain of command responsibility. So not only those officers, the law enforcement who commit the acts, but also the entire chain of command. Because what that has done is created a cloud over the entire force. I want to have better policing.
Well, let me start by saying we got to put the public back in public safety, right? What we're talking about is public safety. And the question is, how do we make ourselves safe? And so much of it is about not criminalizing poverty, but preventing it. And that's in the research. I won't get wonky on you because nobody wants to hear me do that. But let me give you an example that's very concrete. My friend, whose nephew was shot and killed in October, 22-year-old young man, and what the family in all their trauma asked for, had a press conference for, was more resources to invest in their kids. And that is public safety, and communities impacted know what makes them safe. But here's the thing, a reporter asked, well, what did the precinct do? Did they put more police officers out on the street? And my friend said, yes, they did. And it will not prevent the next shooting.
Okay.
And that's the point.
Well, think about this for a moment. While the trial was going on, we had several questionable shootings. We saw a lieutenant that was from Brooklyn and serving in Virginia, pepper sprayed while in uniform. This treatment is a real turning point for America. We have to change the ecosystem and redefine what policing is like in America. And if we're not honest about that, then we're going to find ourselves back here over and over again. And so I believe that this is a tipping point for our country. We must diversify our police departments, not allow officers with really sadistic mindsets to remain in our police agencies, use our dollars better to encourage non-police engagement for those minor infractions or minor encounters. And so this is a moment I think we need to go back to the drawing board and get policing right in America, because we don't have it right now.
Look, the next mayor is going to have to control the police department. And de Blasio lost control of the police lost control of him. We saw some very horrific acts during the summer protests when many of us were protesting Black lives, and the outrageous deaths of so many people, from Eric Garner to Breonna Taylor to George Floyd. And there has to be a reckoning. And what we have to start to think about is how we come up with a community policing plan that does not over police communities of color. And it's not complicated, because this is happening around the country, these discussions, and New York is lagging behind. We are asking our police to do too many things. They're not social workers. They're not guidance counselors. It's not what they do. But yet we call them for every complaint under the sun that has nothing to do with a crime in progress. What are we doing here? I would have police officers do their jobs. We have to make sure that we do better in terms of catching the people who are doing the dangerous crime. Our rates are at a historic low of 26%. So we need to beef up our detective divisions and do that work. But we also have to reinvest some of these police dollars into keeping kids out of the criminal justice system with violence interrupters, with programs that we know work. And we don't need to have police called when there's a mental health issue in the streets. That's what professionals are for.
Do multiple things at once. And I think most New Yorkers would agree that we have underinvested in our communities in different ways, and that there are many incidents that would benefit from having a mental health counselor, a substance abuse worker, or a violence interrupter, as opposed to an armed police officer. An armed police officer is not, excuse me, the ideal person if you're having a mental health breakdown or some issue. So I think most people agree that we need to increase our investment in different types of resources and education and health for various communities. I think most people also agree that if you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on settlements of civil lawsuits against police officers every year, that is an awful use of city resources. There are literally a million better things we could be doing with money than settling these lawsuits. So we need to reform the culture of the police department in different ways. One thing that I've suggested that now people are really excited about, new officers should live in the city. We require that for employees of other city agencies. Certainly for a police officer, living in the city would give them a better understanding of the community that they're serving and protecting. So there are things that we can do to improve matters. But at the same time, we're going to need police officers to help stem frankly, the rising rates of violent crime that are going on in the city. And another form of police accountability is to try and get the resolution rates, which is whether you've apprehended the perpetrator, going up, not down. Because right now, violent crime is going up and the resolution rates are going down, and that is a terrible combination. So that's another form of police accountability.
The pandemic changed the way our kids went to school. Many people believe virtual school doesn't work. Others disagreed. They believed it necessary to protect teachers. What did the candidates have to say about this, and how to level the playing field when it comes to educating our youth?
Education is key to everyone's ability to have economic mobility. My feeling is that the littlest kids and those who have special needs should have been in school 5 days a week from the beginning. We know that they are not transmitters in a big way of COVID. We could have kept them separated and used all of our space to get that done. And they need socialization, not only reading, writing, and arithmetic. They need to be interacting with their peers. I have a 5-year-old niece. She's now spent 20% of her life in a pandemic. She's a very strong personality. So we'll see how school may be a big adjustment when it actually fully reopens. But I believe that school has to be, and I know that you probably have the same feeling, having gone through the public school system, is you went to your public school and it was a great school and it educated you well. And that has to be true in every neighborhood. And that we're thinking about how we continue to make it so that the kids have careers coming out. We need to expand and stop talking about education as a scarcity. We know we can do it. We know we have the talent to do it. We need to get out of principal and teachers' way. But we do need enrichment in all of our schools, particularly art and music in those younger years, because not only does that create a critical thinking mind, but it also, they're going to need to work through sort of the traumas. And I believe art and music are part of how you can move through mental health challenges and have other ways to engage in education. And so I believe we need to have more, not less, for these children. And even through high school, I have proposed that we need more high schools where we are drawing our kids from the top 10% of their middle school class by grade point average, so that you have real performance and that we are integrating that with what is the 21st century need.
We have to get the year back that our kids have lost. We know that. They shouldn't have lost it. We should have had a plan in place. If I had been mayor, we would have closed the schools quickly and clearly, and then we would have spent all the time that we had from March forward through the summer to make sure we were investing in teachers' ability to deliver online learning, getting kids access to the internet, because far too many of our kids in public schools didn't have it. But we also would have been laying out a plan, partnering with parents and with teachers and with principals, with all of our stakeholders on the plan for safe reopening so that everybody had clarity about what was going to happen. We tortured parents and students, still are, with the uncertainty. We needed a clear plan. But this is the opportunity that COVID has given us, is to learn, to learn.
There's always a silver lining, and hopefully, yes.
Yeah, and one of the things we have to learn is, one, we have to be much more innovative with education. Every last one of our kids is exceptional and deserves an excellent education. And one of the things we have to recognize is we're not delivering it enough because we're not allowing for enough innovation. and we have programs that have demonstrated success at not just helping kids catch up to grade level, but helping them do accelerated work. P-TECH is a program that has kids who are in high school behind grade level, focused on technology, who are doing college level work. When we raise our expectations, our kids rise to them. And we have to create a system that raises that expectation, that has teachers who are being invested in and principals to deliver those innovations, build up and identify what's working in our system. We don't talk about that a lot, right? We talk about what's broken, not what's working. There are things that are working. We have to pull them out, lift them up, and take them to scale.
I'm a public school parent myself, along with my wife, Evelyn, who grew up in Queens. And I'm frustrated. The data shows that online school is 30 to 70% worse than in-person school. And we can all sense that's true. We all know it's not as good as being in the building. And then the data also shows that 29% of New Yorkers don't have high-speed internet at home, which would make it very, very hard for their child to go to school online. And unfortunately, we know that 29% is disproportionately represented in communities of color in the Bronx. So we need to attack this problem at multiple levels. We need to reopen schools for young kids and at-risk kids as quickly as possible. And the data also shows that little children are not spreaders of the coronavirus in any significant measure. So this has to be job one. We should be fighting harder to get our schools open for young at-risk children and getting our kids back in position to learn, because we can't have them losing a year in this way. We're going to have to do everything we can to make it up.
Well, education, we failed and we have betrayed inner city youth in 3 areas. Number one, we failed the future young people. We need to have doulas for mothers to give them the right information as they're carrying their babies. And then we must make sure that there's a seamless continuation from pre-K to K, and from K to 12, and from 12 through college. And then we have to do something else, continuing ed. There's a lot of young people who are not in our school system that are not participating in the prosperity of the city because they don't have the proper education, job training, and job placement. And so the betrayal must be corrected, and there must be a seamless pipeline to employment or starting your own business in the city, and we have not done that.
Well, we have to take a quick break, but stay with us. Today's Verdict will be right back right after this.
Well, I got this as a paid internship. Spending my time here, I really enjoyed the people that work here. I enjoy what goes on behind the scenes.
So far, I've learned how to operate a camera, how to host. I learned how to control audio.
My first time hosting was really nerve-wracking, but I really enjoyed it because it was a new experience.
Those were a few of the questions I asked all the candidates, but you asked specific questions of each candidate as well. Now we move on to a few specific questions asked for each mayoral hopeful. Let's start with Diane Morales. I asked Ms. Morales, what is the first essential thing you would focus on if elected mayor?
One is really sort of the deep dive in the budget so that we can begin the divesting from policing and really investing in the things that make communities safe. And I think that's a critical thing. And as part of that comes the idea of housing and how do we move to provide and ensure that we are addressing the housing crisis, both in terms of the folks who are homeless and also in terms of those who are housing insecure. I think those things have to come in tandem because I think housing, and access to housing is a critical pillar to the idea of creating safety in communities.
Eric, what can we do to help those at the lowest level of society, those who need the most support during this crisis?
I really want to encourage New Yorkers to hear me deeply when I talk about the operations of the city. I too was dealing with a health crisis. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I lost my sight. The doctor said I was going to be blind in about a year, had permanent nerve damage in my hands and feet. And I was dealing with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and other chronic diseases that many of your clients and others are dealing with. And it was not until I went to and discovered a doctor outside the city who stated, Eric, I can give you medicine for your blood pressure, your vision loss, your cholesterol, your diabetes, but it's really one thing that's impacting all of those health crises. Instead of trying to treat them in a spot way, why not just go to the foundation? And I did that. I changed my diet and lifestyle, and all of those chronic diseases changed. That is what's happening in New York City right now. We are trying to respond to a lack of education, a lack of proper health care, homelessness, affordable housing. All of these topics is still turning to one area. Our city is dysfunctional, David. We create our crises. Archbishop Desmond Tutu stated, we spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent people from falling in the first place. We have a downstream government that we professionalize, pulling people out of the river. I say, let's go upstream. If we feed people better food, we'll deal with chronic diseases. If we identify learning disabilities and things like dyslexia early, we will prevent crime. If we show people how to have an upstream mindset, we don't fall in the river and lose people on the way down. It's all the same problem. We're just diagnosing and treating them in separate ways.
Catherine, what is your leadership style? Why should we choose you for mayor?
I lead from the front. I have led large organizations, awfully many men in my roles. I think 90% men, and I lead from the front. But I really empower my teams to be creative and then hold them accountable for delivering on my expectations. And that has been incredibly effective. Folks like to work for me. I'm tough, but I'm fair. I am the best person for the job. I'm the most qualified person for the job. I have long-term vision for where we can take this city, and I love this city. I want to do the job of the mayor. I'm not about, parades and making statements or hashtagging on Twitter. I'm about getting the work done.
Maya, how has your father's civil rights movement shaped your vision for the city, and how will you tackle racial injustice as mayor?
I will say my father's legacy shaped me a lot because, one, I grew up on picket lines. That's to start with. Protest was a regular part of our family business, but it was also the people. He put people at the center, people who are impacted by the problems, seeing them as the folks who also have the solutions and are the leaders who should lead those solutions. And that really shaped me because it is about race. It is about recognizing that Black women, he organized Black women who are on welfare, but he didn't see them as broken or needy. He saw them as powerful and as people who could direct and lead the fight for the solutions they needed. And a lot of that leads to one of my big policy platforms, which is a caring economy, because far too many women of all races and all classes have lost a decade of work as a result of COVID.
Yep.
Lost jobs.
I think they were affected the most, really. The women who stayed home with the kids because of the virtual learning, they sacrificed before anybody else did.
And sometimes working at the same time or having to give up a job in order to help kids who are also, as we know, it's difficult and traumatizing. What we've been seeing in COVID, but it's also the women who do the care work as a job. 88% who are women of color who, by the way, Audia Williams, I'm gonna give you one example. Audia Williams, amazing woman. She gets up at 5 a.m., takes 4 buses to get to a man in a wheelchair who she takes care of every day. But she makes $15 an hour, which means all that hard work, she's standing in a food line twice a week, working full-time, caring for someone else. That's something that I saw in my father's organizing and civil rights work. That's something he was fighting to change, and we're still fighting it. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna fix it.
Andrew, Asian hate crimes are on the rise more than they've ever been. What would you do as mayor to make sure that we stop this horrible situation?
I'm the son of immigrants myself. I would be very proud to be the first mayor of Asian American descent. The hatred and racism that's rising towards Asian Americans is heartbreaking and devastating. I'm actually co-hosting a town hall on this subject with Jumaane Williams this weekend to see if we can help people understand what our community is going through. So there are a number of things we need to do. Number one, we have to treat these incidents as hate crimes and have law enforcement pursue these actions to the fullest extent of the law. There's an incident in Queens just this week, and the individual involved was apprehended, and he should be prosecuted as someone who committed a hate crime. And then we need to dedicate more resources to the Asian American community so that people actually will feel comfortable reporting incidents. That particular incident was caught on film, but there are many things that are happening that we will never hear about. And we need to have more trust between the Asian American community and law enforcement so that we can address this problem more fully.
Sean, asthma rates in the Bronx are high. What can you do to protect the health of those in the Bronx, especially during the pandemic? It always seems that the poor neighborhoods that get hit the hardest are the ones who need the most help. How would you help them?
Well, this is a big part of my 15-minute neighborhood as well, is making sure there's healthcare in every single neighborhood. And really, it's 2 different things. One is the healthcare itself, right? What do I mean by that? We have to make sure everybody's insured. I'm proposing a true public option so that everybody, regardless of immigration status, could get the primary care that they need in their neighborhood, right? That's one. But it's not just enough to be covered. They're also, you said it exactly right, asthma, all these other, there are all these what we call environmental determinants of health that are much more prevalent in the Bronx than in other places. What does that mean? The peaker plants, we call them, they're power plants that are fossil fuel driven that are located in the Bronx and other poor Black and brown communities. It is the trucking sites that are belching diesel fumes into neighborhoods around the Bronx. All of those are things that we need to start to change and make sure that's part of 15-minute neighborhoods as well as what you don't have within 15 minutes of your front door. And just one last thing I would say. I announced my campaign at Villa Verde on Brook Avenue. I'm proud of it because when I was housing commissioner, I created a worldwide design competition. It's the most beautiful, sustainable, affordable housing in the world, I think. But think about this from a health perspective. On the ground floor is a health clinic. There is a farmer's market every weekend in the courtyard. And on the roofs are growing vegetables and fruit trees so that kids learn how to eat healthy food. They pick them and they carry them to their apartment and eat them for dinner, right? When we cut the ribbon on it, Ruben Diaz Jr. said, "Let it be known that where the Bronx was once burning, we're now building gardens in the sky," right? That's the kind of thing we need to do to solve our health challenges in the Bronx.
Scott, tell me about the new plan, Estamos con Stringer.
Well, look, it's part of our campaign, and highlighting the rich diversity of the city. The
Yeah.
next mayor has got to be somebody who doesn't just talk to the people who look like me or talk to the people who look like you, but to build a broad coalition. And our Latinos for Stringer coalition is 100 strong from all 5 boroughs. I've been endorsed by some amazing people, Senator Jessica Ramos, Congressman Adriano Espaillat, and the list is, in the Bronx, Amanda Septimo, and I can continue, but we don't have enough time. But one of the great parts of Latinos for Stringer is that my stepfather of 35 some years is leading the charge, along with my stepbrothers, Carlos Cuevas, who, by the way, in his time was the former deputy borough president of the Bronx, the former city clerk after David Dinkins. And it was very exciting when we announced this to see the whole family, the Stringer side and the Cuevas side. And I believe that we're going to compete very heavily for votes in the Latino community, in the rich, diverse Latino community. And it was a very exciting launch.
So Ray, I was reading a little bit about your emergency social services plan. It basically deals with mental health issues, and I think it's a very smart idea. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, what we have decided to do here, David, as we think about how we develop a relationship between law enforcement and the community, is to insert a organization, emergency social services, 24 hours, 7 days a week, that we deploy either before or with the NYPD. And why is that? Because we need to meet each situation with proportionality. It has been said by many, if the only thing that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. In many of our communities, Black and brown communities especially, it's a sledgehammer, which is disproportionate. Let's get those people in who can manage the situation, who are the professionals, like the emergency social services, so that we can get them in and so that they go and respond to the situation proportionately. Many of the challenges we're having, which have been uncovered by COVID and which have been exacerbated, made worse by COVID, we can solve them by getting the right professionals into those situations before we have a disproportionate response, which we've seen that is in tragedy, the loss of so many lives, which we can prevent. And the emergency social services is intended to do just that.
Well, that wraps up this 1 hour special. I hope you enjoyed this condensed version of our mayoral series. The question I asked all the candidates. Once again, if you want to see the interviews in the entirety, please go to bronxnet.org. And most importantly, make sure you vote on June 22nd. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.